Mr. President, I first want to begin by reading a note I got this morning at 7 o'clock from a member of my staff in Maine. And I think it speaks to the issues that we are discussing today in this body, and frankly, I believe should be discussing in the other body. My regional representative said, "Last night I attended the Southern Maine Planning and Development Corporation annual meeting in Sanford." That's a town in southern Maine. "From the time I walked in the door, through dinner, and even walking back to my car, every single person I spoke with either wanted me to convey their thanks to Senator King for his stand on, quote, doing something on gun control, to asking me that he stand firm and do more. People who own guns and said so, and those who don't. Every single person expressed dismay that Congress has not acted on this. Many mentioned the sit-in in the House of Representatives and were shocked that the issue would not even be given a vote. Many wanted to know when the vote would be taken in the Senate. People in Maine, including responsible gun owners, want more background checks and limitations on those who raise red flags. They want common sense legislation. I had to send this to you this morning because I was quite surprised at the total focus on this issue," unquote. Mr. President, we will have before us, I hope, sometime today, an amendment which I consider a national security issue. Since being in this body, I have been privileged to serve on both the Armed Services and Intelligence Committees, and have studied and worked on and listened to hearing after hearing on the terrorism threat to this country. And something important has happened with regard to that threat over the last 3 or 4 years. We have moved into a new era of threats to our country, different than the terrorism threat that we found ourselves facing after 2011. In 2011, that plot was hatched overseas. It involved foreigners who got to our shores one way or another and performed a heinous attack on our country. Now we are facing attacks from within. People who are already here are radicalized online and receive what I call a terrorist APB from ISIS or Al-Qaeda that basically says, go out and do harm to Americans. The difference is the threat is now here and not abroad, although it may be inspired and in some cases directed from abroad. I call this terrorism 2.0, and it raises an entirely new national security issue for us, and that is, how do these terrorists obtain arms? ISIS in Syria or Iraq, if we are aware of an arms shipment or a cache of arms somewhere in their territory, we take it out. We send our fighter planes. We send any resources that we have to keep them from getting those arms. But if an ISIS-inspired terrorist as the United States wants to obtain arms, all they have to do is go to a gun store and buy them. It makes no sense to me that we spend millions of dollars to keep arms away from terrorists in the Middle East and do nothing to keep arms away from terrorists here in the United States. That's why I'm supporting, along with a bipartisan group, a nonpartisan group of other senators, led by Susan Collins of Maine, a common sense piece of legislation that will simply add to the list of those items which prohibit people from getting guns if you're on the no-fly list or the selectee list of those people who are required to have additional screening at an airport. This is about as simple and common sense as it gets. To vote against this is basically saying it's okay with us that terrorist people on the no-fly list get a gun. I just can't understand any argument that would justify that. And the provision that Senator Collins has painstakingly developed with consultation with both sides of the aisle has in it due process protections for someone who may be on one of these lists, either inadvertently, through a mistake, or improperly. They have the opportunity to say, I shouldn't be on the list, I should be able to buy a gun, and they have an opportunity to make that case in a very limited period of time, and to have their chance to obtain full due process to protect their constitutional right. So this is a well-balanced, thoughtful proposal. It is not taking anybody's guns. It is not a ban on any kind of weapon. It simply says, no guns for terrorists. And it seems to me that is a basic common sense amendment, and I really, frankly, can't understand why it's become so difficult to move it forward. We had a filibuster here last week. As a result of that filibuster, we ended up having several votes on this issue earlier this week, and I hope and believe that we're going to have at least one more, either today or early next week, on the Collins Amendment. In the House of Representatives, however, there's no vote whatsoever, to the point where members of the House have had to take to the floor and literally take over the floor and say, we're not leaving until we get a vote. It's, I guess I would call it the House version of a filibuster. I think it's important to emphasize that those people in the House are not saying, we're going to stay here until we pass legislation. They're saying, let's have a vote. That's our job here. If you ask any sixth grader, what do senators and representatives do? They vote. They vote on things. That's what we're supposed to be doing. That's why we're here. And for the House, the majority in the House, to adjourn for a vacation, for a break, for the next 10 days, without even allowing a vote or any debate on this issue, I just find inexplicable. I mean, it just looks ridiculous to the people of this country. My suspicion is that many of those people are going to get home over the next few days, and their citizens, their constituents, are going to say, what gives? This thing about terrorists seems to make sense to me. And why didn't you get something done on this? I hope and believe that is what will happen, but to force the members of the House to take this extraordinary step, which I understand has only happened one or two other times in our history, in order to simply get a vote on an issue that is of absolutely top-of-the-line concern to the people of the United States, again, it just doesn't make sense. And it's one of the reasons we often wonder, why is Congress held in so low esteem? Because we're not doing our job. People send us here to do a job, to wrestle with difficult issues, not to suppress them, not to push them under the rug, not to ignore them, but to debate and discuss and try to come up with common sense solutions. And indeed, that's what we've done here in the Senate. I've been working on this for the past 48 hours, consultations with other senators, trying to get the language right, trying to find ways to accommodate various interests and concerns about this bill. And hopefully now we're going to be able to get to the floor to have a vote. In the House, they're not even allowing that to happen. I should have said in the other body, they're not allowing that to happen. I think this is an issue of real importance to the American people. And I sense a very significant change in terms of people's views of this issue. I understand there was a poll released just this morning that 85 to 90% of the American people believe that we should try to keep guns out of the hands of terrorists. No fly, no buy. It's a very simple message. And interestingly, on that poll, the highest percentage of people that agreed with that proposition were Republicans. 90% of Republicans responded to the CNN poll that terrorists should be kept from getting guns. And that's what this amendment that we're going to be considering is all about. It seems to me that this is a case where Congress has an opportunity to do what it is that we're supposed to do. Not to avoid, not to obfuscate, not to sweep under the rug, but to act. And I can't presuppose the outcome. I believe and hope that the outcome will be positive. We'll take an action on this common sense amendment that Senator Collins has developed. But at least let's act. And I hope the other body would do the same thing. To have adjourned for the recess prematurely simply because they didn't want to confront or discuss or debate this issue, I think brings discredit on this entire institution and is greatly to be regretted. I come from a state that believes in the Second Amendment. I believe in the Second Amendment. I've insisted through this process that anything that limits people's ability to get guns, if they're on a no-fly list or a selectee list, they need to have due process in order to be sure that they're properly on that list and that there's good cause for them not to be able to purchase guns. I believe that that process should be there. It is there. This is in no way a violation of the Second Amendment. It is in no way an effort to take anybody's guns away. It is an effort to keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. And the Supreme Court has affirmed over and over, even Justice Scalia has affirmed directly and unequivocally that this is appropriate under the Second Amendment. So I commend my colleagues on both sides of the aisle who have developed this common sense proposal. I hope that we can pass it today by an overwhelming vote, and maybe that will help in the other body to persuade them to at least consider, discuss, debate, and then vote on this issue that is of vital concern to the American people. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.